In the ledgers of 19th-century American plantations, beneath columns for cotton yields and livestock inventories, there sometimes appeared entries for human beings catalogued with the same chilling detachment. A 1799 Virginia statute, for instance, legally defined enslaved children as increase, classifying them alongside calves and lambs as assets accruing to the master. This was the brutal arithmetic of slavery, where humanity was a commodity. But in the isolated backwoods of Oglethorpe County, Georgia, in the year 1847, one plantation mistress took this logic to its unnatural conclusion, refining it into a quiet, systematic horror that the law never anticipated and history has struggled to unearth. At Veridian Manor, the prettiest house in a 10-mile radius, the term increase took on a meaning so dark it was never committed to any official record, spoken only in whispers that died in the humid air between the slave cabins. Sound of a heavy, leather-bound book closing, followed by the faint scratching of a quill pen. The program had no name, but its purpose was absolute: to improve the human stock of the plantation, blending the blood of the enslaved with that of the master's own sons, all under the watchful, discerning eye of their mother. It was an experiment in flesh and legacy, a secret buried so deep that its exhumation would threaten to unravel the very fabric of an already monstrous world. Before we go deeper, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it there right now? Veridian Manor rose from the red Georgia clay like a monument to a dream. Its white columns, fashioned from heart pine and meticulously painted each spring, supported a veranda that wrapped around the house like a lover's embrace. From its shaded depths, Elara Vance had ruled for nearly a year as the plantation's sole proprietor. Her husband, Elias, had been taken by a sudden fever the previous summer, leaving her with 2 sons, 3,000 acres of struggling cotton, and debts that were a well-mannered secret among Savannah's bankers. At 39, Elara possessed a beauty that had hardened rather than faded, her features as precise and unforgiving as cut glass. She managed Veridian not with the overt brutality common on other plantations, but with a disquieting stillness, a control so absolute it felt like a permanent drop in atmospheric pressure. Her orders were given in a voice that never rose above a cultivated murmur, yet they carried the weight of divine law. The enslaved population of 73 souls learned quickly that her displeasure was a far more terrifying thing than any overseer's whip. It was a cold, silent judgment that could result in a family being broken apart at the auction block in Athens, a fate worse than any physical punishment. This quiet terror was the engine that ran Veridian Manor, ensuring its fields were planted on time and its harvests were maximized, but it was not enough to secure the future she envisioned. Elara Vance did not believe in chance. She believed in blood. Her late husband had been a man of passion and poor judgment, buying land he couldn't afford and horses he couldn't race. Elara, however, came from a line of meticulous Charleston merchants who understood that a legacy was not built on sentiment, but on assets. In the wake of Elias' death, as she stared at the ledger's bleeding red ink, she concluded that the plantation's most valuable and most malleable asset was its human property. The cotton was failing, the soil exhausted, but the people, she reasoned, could be improved. The idea took root in the same part of her mind that calculated profit margins and planned crop rotations. It was a problem of husbandry. One did not breed a prize bull with a common heifer. One did not allow the best bloodlines to be diluted by indiscriminate pairings. She had seen firsthand how certain traits, strength, resilience, and agreeable temperament, a certain cast of feature deemed desirable, could be passed down. She began to observe the women in the quarters with a new, unnerving focus, her gaze lingering not with the lecherous eye of a master, but with the detached appraisal of a breeder. She was searching for her foundation stock, the vessels through which the future of Veridian Manor would be forged. This was not a matter of lust or depravity, she told herself in the silent echo chamber of her study. It was a matter of science, of legacy, of survival. Her two sons were the other half of the equation. Julian, at 19, was a reflection of his father, handsome, pliable, and desperate for his mother's approval. He moved through the world with a gentleman's grace, but beneath the surface lay a profound weakness, a terror of disappointing the matriarch who now controlled his inheritance and his future. Thomas, a year younger, was a different creature entirely. He was quiet, watchful, and possessed a brooding intelligence that made Elara uneasy. He preferred the solitude of the plantation's library to the company of his peers, and he looked upon the system of slavery with a discomfort he had learned to conceal. He saw the humanity in the faces of the enslaved, a sentiment his mother considered a dangerous and costly flaw. Elara knew that Julian would do as he was told, his moral objections easily soothed by appeals to duty and family honor. Thomas, however, would be a problem. He would need to be managed, his conscience carefully navigated or, if necessary, broken. The plan forming in her mind required both of them. It was a symmetry that appealed to her sense of order. Two sons, two distinct bloodlines to be woven into her tapestry. Julian's compliance would be the instrument of her will, while conquering Thomas's resistance would be the ultimate proof of her absolute control over the world she was creating. The house began to feel smaller, the tension coiling in the spaces between them. The selection process began in the autumn of 1847. Elara's criteria were meticulous. She chose 6 young women, all between the ages of 16 and 20. They were chosen for health, for strength evident in their work in the fields or the house, and for a specific physical beauty that Elara prized. Among them was Sarah, a quiet girl of 17 who worked in the laundry, her hands perpetually raw from lye soap. Sarah was distinguished by her unusually bright, intelligent eyes and a graceful bearing that seemed out of place with her station. She had been born at Veridian, as had her mother, and she understood the subtle currents of power that flowed from the big house. She knew that to be noticed by the mistress was rarely a blessing. The chosen women were moved from the communal cabins into a small, whitewashed cottage set apart from the others, near the edge of the woods. They were given new dresses of simple, clean cotton, and their rations were improved. The changes were explained as a reward for their hard work and good conduct, but no one in the quarters believed it. The other enslaved people watched them with a mixture of envy and fear. Hetty, Sarah's aunt and the plantation's cook, pulled her niece aside one evening, her face a mask of worry. "You be careful, child," she whispered, her voice rough. "The mistress don't give nothing for free. When a fox starts fattening up a hen, it ain't for the hen's health." Inside the whitewashed cottage, a strange new life began. The 6 women were exempt from their former duties. Their days were now structured around a curriculum of Elara's own design. They were taught needlework, basic household management, and were instructed in what Elara termed proper comportment. She would visit them daily, inspecting their hands for calluses, their posture as they sat, their speech for any trace of dialect she deemed unrefined. It felt less like education and more like grooming. The atmosphere was thick with unspoken questions. The women whispered among themselves at night, their theories growing wilder and more fearful. Were they being trained for sale to a wealthy household in Savannah? Were they being prepared for some special role in the big house? The truth remained locked behind Elara Vance's serene, unreadable expression. Sarah, more than the others, felt the chilling purpose behind the strange ritual. She watched the mistress's eyes and saw not kindness, but calculation. She felt like a piece on a game board, being moved into position for a purpose she could not yet fathom. The cottage, meant to be a place of privilege, began to feel like a cage, its clean walls and new dresses only serving to heighten their isolation and vulnerability. The scent of jasmine from the nearby trellis seemed cloying, sickly sweet, like flowers on a grave. The true nature of the program was revealed not with a declaration, but with a quiet summons. One evening in late October, a house servant arrived at the cottage and informed Sarah that the mistress required her presence at the big house. The walk across the manicured lawn felt like a journey to an execution. The main house was silent, illuminated by the soft glow of whale oil lamps that cast long, dancing shadows on the walls. Elara was waiting in her private study, a room filled with the scent of beeswax and old paper. She sat behind a massive mahogany desk, a leather-bound ledger open before her. "Sarah," she began, her voice calm and even, "you have been chosen for a great honor. You are to play a vital role in securing the future of this family and this plantation." She then explained the arrangement with a terrifying, clinical clarity. There was no talk of love or desire. She spoke of bloodlines, of heritable traits, of creating a new generation of servants who would be stronger, more intelligent, and more valuable. She explained that Sarah would be expected to bear children for the Vance family, and that the father would be one of her sons. It was presented not as a violation, but as a duty. Promotion. "Your children," Elara finished, her gaze as sharp as a needle, "will be of a superior class. They will be cared for, educated to their station. You are being elevated, Sarah. You should be grateful." Sarah stood frozen, the words washing over her like a tide of ice water. Gratitude was the last thing she felt. She felt a profound, bottomless horror, a sense of being erased, of her body being claimed as nothing more than a vessel for another woman's ambition. Her future, her children, their very blood had been annexed and repurposed. To refuse was impossible. The unspoken threat of the auction block, of separation from her family, hung in the air. To show revulsion would be an insult Elara would not forgive. Sarah's mind raced, searching for the right response, the mask that would ensure her survival. She looked at the ledger on the desk, its columns neatly ruled, and imagined her name being entered into it, followed by notations about her health, her temperament, her suitability as breeding stock. She was no longer a person. She was an entry in a book, a variable in an equation of flesh and profit. With a strength she did not know she possessed, she forced her features into a neutral expression, dipped her head slightly, and uttered the only words she could. "I understand, mistress." The lie almost choked her, but it was a necessary one. In that moment, a quiet, cold resolve formed in her heart. She would survive this. She would play the part Elara had assigned her, but she would watch, she would listen, and she would remember everything. Her first assigned encounter was with Julian. He came to her designated room in a secluded wing of the house, a space furnished with a simple bed and a single window that overlooked the dark, rustling woods. He did not look at her, his gaze fixed on the floorboards, his face pale in the candlelight. He smelled of whiskey and shame. He performed the act with a clumsy, detached haste, a silent, desperate transaction that had nothing to do with passion and everything to do with filial duty. Sarah endured it with a stillness that was its own form of resistance, her mind retreating to a place deep inside herself where she could not be touched. She noted the tremor in his hands, the way he flinched when their skin made contact. He was as much a prisoner of his mother's design as she was, albeit a gilded one. When it was over, he dressed quickly and left without a word, the sound of his footsteps receding down the polished hall echoing the hollowness in the room. Sarah lay in the darkness, listening to the chirping of crickets outside, feeling a profound and chilling pity for the young man. He was weak, broken by his mother's will, and his weakness, she realized, made him predictable. It was Thomas, the younger brother with the storm in his eyes, whom she truly feared. Thomas's turn came a month later. Unlike his brother, he looked directly at her when he entered the room. His eyes were not filled with lust or shame, but with a complex mixture of anger, curiosity, and a startling degree of empathy. He did not approach the bed. Instead, he walked to the window and stared out into the darkness. "Does she watch?" he asked, his voice low and tense. "Does she stand outside this door and listen?" The question shocked Sarah out of her prepared detachment. "I I don't know," she stammered. "She is always watching," Thomas said, more to himself than to her. He turned to face her, his expression hard. "I will not do this. I will not be a stud for her grotesque ambitions." He explained that he had argued with his mother, that he had refused, but Elara's power was absolute. She had threatened to sell Hetty, Sarah's aunt, to a sugar plantation in Louisiana if he did not comply. The threat had broken his resistance. He was trapped. "So we will play our parts," he said, his voice laced with bitterness. "For the audience of one. But I want you to know I see you. You are not just stock." He then sat in a chair in the corner of the room and remained there until the first light of dawn touched the sky. He never laid a hand on her. It was an act of defiance so profound, so unexpected, that it planted a dangerous seed in Sarah's heart, the seed of a possible ally. Elara's ledger became the true heart of Veridian Manor. In its pages, she documented her experiment with the cold precision of a botanist. She noted the dates of the encounters, the physical and temperamental characteristics of the women, her observations of their compliance. After each of Julian's visits, she would note, Subject J, compliant, procedure completed. After Thomas's nights of silent vigil, she wrote, Subject T, resistant, requires further conditioning, procedure feigned. She knew Thomas was not consummating the act, but for now she allowed his small rebellion. She believed his will could be eroded over time. The ledger was filled with chillingly objective language. Sarah was noted for her resilient constitution and high intelligence, traits Elara deemed priority for replication. Another girl, Clara, was marked down for a melancholic disposition, which Elara considered an undesirable flaw to be monitored. The women of the cottage were no longer people. They were a collection of traits to be curated, combined, and perfected. The book was her Bible, her grimoire. She kept it locked in a safe hidden behind a false panel in her study, a secret testament to the monstrous world she was building, one carefully chosen pairing at a time. The existence of this book became the central obsession for Sarah. It was the proof. It was the physical manifestation of the horror, and she knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that it was the key to its undoing. As the months passed, a subtle but corrosive change took place in the dynamic of the big house. The silent war between Elara and Thomas escalated. She would make pointed remarks at the dinner table about duty and legacy, her words aimed at him like polished arrows. He would respond with a wall of sullen silence, his defiance passive but unwavering. Julian, caught in the middle, grew more withdrawn, his evenings increasingly lost in a haze of Bourbon. He performed his duty at the cottage with the mechanical regularity of a clockwork automaton, his spirit seemingly vacating his body during the act. The house, once merely oppressive, now felt poisoned. The servants tiptoed around the family, sensing the rot at its core. The tension was a palpable thing, a fifth presence in every room. For the women in the cottage, this familial decay offered no comfort. It only made their situation more precarious. They were the cause of the strife, the living symbols of the mistress's unnatural ambition. They learned to read the moods of the house from the expressions on the servants who brought their meals, to gauge the level of danger from the sound of angry, muted voices carrying from the study late at night. They were trapped in the heart of a storm, and they knew that when it finally broke, they would be the ones to drown. One of the other chosen women, a girl named Mary, fell ill with a lung fever that winter. Her sickness was a complication Elara had not anticipated. In her world of calculated breeding, disease was an impurity, a failure of the stock. Elara's visits to the cottage, usually models of detached inspection, became tinged with impatience. She saw Mary's racking cough not as a sign of human suffering, but as a flaw in her investment. Dr. Miller was summoned from Athens, but his treatments were ineffective. As Mary grew weaker, Elara's visits ceased altogether. One morning, the women awoke to find Mary's bed empty. There was no explanation. It was as if she had never been there. A few days later, Hetty told Sarah in a hushed, tearful whisper that a wagon had come for Mary in the middle of the night. She had been sold to a trader passing through, her illness disclosed as a minor defect. The message was brutally clear. Those who failed to meet the requirements of the program would be discarded. They were assets only as long as they were useful. The disappearance of Mary solidified the terror in the cottage. The women understood now that they were utterly disposable. Their value was tied entirely to their reproductive potential, and any failure, illness, infertility, or even a perceived melancholic disposition could mean being cast out and sold away from everything and everyone they had ever known. In the spring, Sarah discovered she was pregnant. The child was Julian's. The realization brought no joy, only a cold, sharp dread. This child, her child, was not a product of love or even choice, but the result of a calculated entry in a ledger. It was the first success of Elara's program, and the mistress's satisfaction was a terrifying thing to behold. Elara moved Sarah into a private room in the main house, overseeing her diet and her health with obsessive care. She was no longer Sarah. She was a vessel, the incubator for the next generation of Vance property. During this time, the strange, silent alliance between Sarah and Thomas deepened. He would find excuses to speak with her, sometimes bringing her a book from the library under the guise of an errand from his mother. They spoke in coded language, their conversations circling the edges of the truth. He spoke of the hypocrisy of a society that preached Christian virtue while practicing a barbarism that would shame heathens. She, in turn, described the fear and despair of the women in the cottage. They were two prisoners in the same fortress, one in chains of iron, the other in chains of gold, finding a fragile common ground in their shared opposition to the queen who ruled their world. This connection became Sarah's lifeline, a small, secret space where her humanity was acknowledged. Elara's obsession with the coming child was all-consuming. She spoke of it not as a baby but as an outcome. He would sit with Sarah for hours, making notes in a new, smaller ledger dedicated solely to the pregnancy. She recorded Sarah's diet, her moods, her physical changes, all with the same dispassionate scrutiny. She would read aloud from treatises on animal husbandry, drawing parallels between the breeding of horses and the cultivation of a superior servant class. The temperament of the mother is crucial, she would say, her eyes fixed on Sarah. A calm and placid dam produces a calm and placid foal. You will remain serene, Sarah, for the good of the outcome. The constant surveillance was a form of psychological torture. Sarah felt as though her very thoughts were being monitored for signs of noncompliance. She had to consciously school her features into a mask of placid acceptance, a serene vessel for the mistress's grand design. But beneath the surface, her mind was a whirlwind of rebellion. She studied Elara, memorizing her habits, the way she carried the keys to her study, the specific times of day she was occupied with plantation business. She was no longer just a victim. She was a spy in the heart of the enemy's camp, gathering intelligence for a war she did not yet know how to fight. The birth took place in the heat of early summer. It was a difficult labor, attended by Hetty and a midwife from a neighboring plantation, with Elara presiding over the entire affair like a scientist overseeing a critical experiment. The child was a boy, healthy and strong, with his father Julian's fair hair, and to Elara's immense satisfaction, Sarah's bright, intelligent eyes. Elara took the baby, inspecting him with an owner's pride. "An excellent result," she murmured, her gaze sweeping over him. "Combination of traits is most promising." She named him Samuel, not after a family member, but after a figure in a book on animal genetics she admired. Sarah was allowed to nurse him, but her role was clearly defined. She was the wet nurse, the caregiver, not the mother. Elara made it clear that Samuel was a Vance asset. He belonged to the house, to the ledger, to the program. Holding her son, Sarah felt a fierce, protective love that was so powerful it felt like a physical weapon. This child was not an outcome. He was her son, and she would not let him be raised as a prize animal in Elara Vance's grotesque menagerie. The birth of her son was not the culmination of Elara's plan. It was the beginning of Sarah's rebellion. Life after Samuel's birth settled into a new, disturbing rhythm. Sarah lived in the big house, a gilded prisoner, her every moment dedicated to the care of her son under Elara's suffocating supervision. Julian, the boy's father, rarely saw him. He would sometimes catch a glimpse of the baby in Sarah's arms and would quickly look away, his face a canvas of guilt and misery. He was a ghost in his own home, haunted by his complicity. Thomas, however, sought out opportunities to see his nephew. He would play with the baby, his usual brooding expression softening into something akin to tenderness. In these stolen moments, he and Sarah would speak more openly. "She is making plans for his future," Thomas told her one day, his voice low. "She speaks of his training, of preparing him to be an overseer one day, a superior class of slave to manage the others." The idea of her son being molded into a tool for his own family's enslavement was the final catalyst for Sarah. The ledger was no longer just a symbol of their oppression. It was a threat to her child's future. She had to get it. She had to expose the truth of what was happening at Veridian Manor, not just for herself, but for Samuel. The plan began to form in whispers and furtive glances. It was a desperate gamble, with their lives as the stakes. Thomas told Sarah about a network of Quakers who operated a station on the Underground Railroad, located a 2-day journey north of them. They were known to help enslaved people escape, but more importantly, they were abolitionists who might know what to do with the kind of evidence the ledger represented. The book was the key. Without it, their story was just the word of a rebellious son and an enslaved woman against a respected plantation mistress. With it, the horror of Veridian Manor was undeniable. The first step was to locate the ledger. Sarah knew it was kept in Elara's study, in a hidden safe. She had seen the mistress open it only a few times. It required a specific sequence of pressures on a carved panel of the bookshelf. For weeks, Sarah feigned clumsiness, dusting the study, finding reasons to be near the bookshelf, watching from the corner of her eye until she had memorized the sequence. The second step was to get the key to the safe itself, which Elara wore on a chatelaine at her waist. This would be the most difficult and dangerous part of the plan. They decided to act during the annual harvest party, a grand affair where the Vances entertained neighbors and business associates from Athens, in the savannah. The house would be filled with guests, the staff would be distracted, and Elara herself would be occupied with her duties as hostess. It was the perfect cover. Thomas's role was to create a diversion. He was to stage a loud, drunken argument with Julian on the veranda, a spectacle of sibling rivalry that would draw the attention of their mother and the guests. In the ensuing chaos, Sarah's task was to get the key. She would have to be close to Elara, serving drinks or clearing plates. She would need a moment of contact, a feigned stumble, anything to allow her to unclip the key from the chatelaine. The risk was immense. If she were caught, she would be whipped, sold, or worse. Hetty, though terrified, agreed to help. She would ensure that Julian was supplied with enough bourbon to make his part in the staged argument believable, and she would create a secondary distraction in the kitchen if needed. The night of the party arrived, the air thick with the scent of roasted pig, magnolia, and impending disaster. The party was in full swing, the sound of laughter and a string quartet filling the warm night air. Sarah moved through the crowded parlor, a silver tray of glasses in her hands, her heart hammering against her ribs. Her eyes were fixed on the small, ornate brass key hanging from Elara's waist. It seemed to mock her, glinting in the candlelight. She watched Thomas and Julian on the veranda, their faces illuminated by lanterns. At the prearranged signal, Thomas running a hand through his hair, the argument began. It started with low, angry murmurs, then escalated into shouts. Thomas accused Julian of cheating at cards, of dishonoring their father's memory. The performance was utterly convincing, fueled by years of real resentment and Julian's bourbon-soaked misery. Heads turned. Conversations faltered. Elara's face tightened with fury and embarrassment. She excused herself from her guests and swept toward the veranda to put an end to the spectacle. This was Sarah's moment. As Elara passed, Sarah stepped forward as if to offer a glass of water and stumbled, lurching against the mistress. The tray of glasses crashed to the floor. In the split second of confusion, her fingers, nimble from years of needlework and laundry, found the clasp of the key and unhooked it. She palmed it as she fell to her knees amidst the broken glass. "You clumsy fool," Elara hissed, her attention momentarily diverted from her sons. But the shouts from the veranda were growing louder. She shot a venomous glare at Sarah before turning to deal with the more public humiliation. "Clean this up," she commanded, before sweeping out onto the veranda. Guests and house servants rushed to help Sarah, their sympathy and clicks of disapproval covering her actions. With trembling hands, she secreted the key into a pocket sewn on the inside of her dress. The first part of the plan was complete, but the terror was far from over. She now had to get to the study, open the safe, and take the ledger without being seen. Every nerve in her body screamed with the urge to run, but she forced herself to move slowly, methodically, cleaning the last of the broken glass. She had to wait until the commotion outside had fully captured the house's attention. The argument on the veranda reached its crescendo as Thomas shoved Julian, sending him stumbling back into a wicker chair. The sound of splintering wood and a collective gasp from the guests was the signal. Sarah slipped away from the parlor and down the quiet, shadowed hall toward the study. The heart of the monster awaited. The study was dark and silent, a stark contrast to the noise of the party. The lock on the door clicked softly behind her. Using a lucifer match, she lit a single candle, its small flame pushing back the immense darkness. Her hands shook so badly she could barely hold it. She moved to the bookshelf, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against the silence. Her fingers traced the carved wooden panel, finding the familiar sequence. A faint click and the panel swung inward, revealing the small iron safe. The key, cold and heavy in her palm, felt like the key to hell itself. It slid into the lock and turned with a well-oiled whisper. Inside the safe lay the ledger. It was heavier than she had imagined, bound in dark green leather, its pages filled with her mistress's elegant, precise script. Taking it felt like sacrilege, like stealing a sacred text. She tucked the book into a large cloth sack she had hidden in the study earlier, along with a small bundle of food and a water skin prepared by Hetty. She relocked the empty safe, closed the panel, and blew out the candle. She stood for a moment in the absolute darkness, the weight of the stolen book a terrifying, solid presence against her body. The second stage was done. Now came the escape. Her escape route had been planned for weeks. Not through the front of the house, but through the study's large window, which opened onto a rarely used section of the garden at the back of the manor. Outside, the sounds of the party were muffled. She could still hear the raised voices of Thomas and Elara, who was now publicly berating both her sons. The diversion was holding. Sarah slipped out the window, her bare feet sinking into the soft, damp earth. She kept to the shadows, moving along the tree line toward the old smokehouse at the edge of the property. This was the designated meeting point. Hetty was supposed to have brought Samuel there, bundled for travel. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sounded like an alarm. She expected to hear the hounds at any moment, to see the lights of a search party bobbing through the trees. But there was nothing. The night remained focused on the drama unfolding on the veranda. When she reached the smokehouse, the door creaked open. Hetty stood there, her face a mess of tears and terror, the sleeping form of Samuel bundled in her arms. "Go now, child," Hetty whispered, pressing the baby into Sarah's arms. "And don't you ever look back." Sarah ran. With her son strapped to her chest and the ledger heavy in its sack, she fled into the dark Georgia woods. She did not know the path, but Thomas had drawn her a map on a scrap of cloth, marking a trail that followed a creek northward. The sounds of the party faded behind her, replaced by the symphony of the night woods. Fear gave her a strength she had never known, propelling her through tangled undergrowth and across shallow streams. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat, every sound the prelude to capture. She thought of the other women in the cottage, left behind to face Elara's wrath when the theft and escape were discovered. A wave of guilt washed over her, but she pushed it down. Her survival, and the survival of the truth in the ledger, was the only thing that could give their suffering any meaning. She ran for what felt like hours, until her lungs burned and her legs ached, stopping only for brief moments to nurse Samuel and catch her breath. She was guided by the North Star, a distant, shimmering point of light in the vast, terrifying darkness. It was a symbol of a freedom she had never known but was now running toward with every ounce of her being. Back at Veridian Manor, the party disintegrated into chaos and recrimination. Elara, having finally separated her sons, returned to the parlor to find her guests whispering among themselves, their expressions a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. The scandal of her sons' behavior was a deep humiliation. It was only an hour later, when she retired to her study to escape the lingering whispers, that she discovered the true catastrophe. The moment she saw the scuff marks on the floor beneath the bookshelf, she knew. She flew to the hidden panel, her hands trembling as she opened it. The safe was there, locked as it should be. For a fleeting second, she felt a wave of relief. But when she used her spare key to open it, her relief curdled into an icy dread that was colder than any anger. The safe was empty. The ledger was gone. And then the reports came from the servants. Sarah was missing. The baby was gone. The puzzle pieces snapped together in her mind with horrifying clarity. It was not a simple escape. It was a conspiracy. Her son, Thomas, his defiance, his arguments, it had all been a performance. He had helped her. The betrayal was so profound, so absolute, it nearly stopped her heart. Elara's rage was a terrifying, silent thing. Her face became a white mask of fury. She did not scream or faint. She walked with a preternatural calm to the main hall and rang the bell for the overseer. "Get the dogs," she said, her voice barely a whisper yet carrying more menace than a shout. "And gather every man you can. They went north. She has my son and she has my property. I want them back." Within the hour, a posse of men with lanterns and hounds was assembled on the lawn. The dogs, agitated and eager, strained at their leashes, catching the scent from a piece of Sarah's clothing retrieved from her room. Thomas watched from the veranda, his face a carefully constructed mask of concern. His mother shot him a look of pure venom, a look that confirmed she knew he was involved. "You will ride with them," she commanded. "You will help find what you helped lose. And if you do anything to hinder this search, I will not need a traitor to deal with Hetty. I will do it myself." The threat was clear. Hetty's life was now the hostage ensuring Thomas's cooperation. He mounted his horse, his heart a leaden weight in his chest, and rode out with the hunters, forced to participate in the hunt for the woman he had helped free. For 2 days, Sarah traveled north, pushing herself to the point of collapse. The ledger felt heavier with every step, a constant reminder of the risk she had taken. The hounds were a persistent terror in the back of her mind. She could almost hear their baying on the wind, a sound that sent waves of adrenaline through her exhausted body. She waded through streams to throw them off her scent, chewed on wild onions to mask her own smell, and used every bit of woodcraft and instinct she possessed to survive. On the 3rd day, she stumbled into a clearing and found it. A small farm with a simple, unpainted house, a quilt with a specific star pattern hanging on a washing line. It was the sign Thomas had told her to look for. A man with a kind, weathered face and a long gray beard came out to meet her. He was a Quaker named Jedediah. He took one look at her ragged state, the sleeping baby on her chest, and the fear in her eyes, and simply said, "The art's safe now, sister. Come inside." The relief was so overwhelming that Sarah's legs gave out, and she collapsed at his feet, the heavy ledger falling to the ground beside her. Inside the small, clean farmhouse, Sarah told her story. She spoke for hours, her voice hoarse with exhaustion, while Jedediah's wife, Martha, tended to Samuel and brought Sarah food and water. When she was finished, she opened the ledger and placed it on the table between them. Jedediah put on his spectacles and began to read. As he turned the pages, his kind face hardened into a mask of grim resolve. He read aloud some of Elara's entries, his voice filled with a quiet horror. Subject S. Resilient constitution. High intelligence. Priority for replication. Outcome 1. Samuel. Excellent result. Combination of traits is most promising. He closed the book, his hand resting on its leather cover as if to keep the evil contained within. "This is not merely a record of sin," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "It is a testament. It is proof of a wickedness so profound it must be brought into the light." He explained that he would send a writer immediately to Philadelphia, to the headquarters of the Pennsylvania Abolition Society. This book, he told her, would become a weapon in their fight. It was more valuable than 100 speeches, for it was the voice of the slave owner herself, condemning her own system in her own hand. The search party, meanwhile, was failing. Thomas, forced to ride with the overseer, subtly sabotaged their efforts at every turn. He would misdirect them, pointing out false trails, casting doubt on the dog's instincts, and slowing the pace with a supposedly lame horse. He played his part perfectly, appearing frustrated and eager, while secretly praying for Sarah's success. After 3 days of fruitless searching, with rations running low and morale collapsing, the overseer called off the hunt. They returned to Veridian Manor empty-handed. Elara received the news in her study, her face impassive. She looked at Thomas, her eyes burning with a cold fire. She knew he had beaten her. She could not prove his sabotage without admitting the existence of the program and the ledger, a public confession that would ruin her. She was trapped in a prison of her own secrets. That night, she summoned Hetty to the study. Instead of selling her, Elara dismissed her from her duties as cook and sent her to the fields, the hardest and most grueling labor on the plantation. It was a punishment meant to be a slow, living death, a constant, visible reminder to Thomas of his mother's power and her wrath. The ledger arrived in Philadelphia a week later and caused a sensation within the abolitionist movement. Its contents were more damning than they could have ever hoped. Here was methodical, documented proof of the ultimate logical conclusion of slavery, the reduction of human beings to mere livestock, their reproductive capabilities harnessed for profit in a systematic, eugenics-like program orchestrated by a refined Southern lady. It shattered the paternalistic myths the South tried to build around its peculiar institution. The Abolition Society made copies of key pages. They began to circulate them, first privately among influential politicians and journalists, and then more publicly in pamphlets and broadsheets, always carefully omitting names and locations to protect their sources. The story of the Georgia breeder became a whispered scandal in northern circles, a potent piece of anti-slavery propaganda. The physical ledger was kept hidden, a powerful piece of evidence held in reserve, its existence a threat to the entire Southern power structure. It was a bomb waiting to explode. At Veridian Manor, a cold and bitter peace settled. Elara never spoke of Sarah, Samuel, or the ledger again. To the outside world, she was a grieving mother whose infant grandson and his nurse had been tragically lost, likely taken by rogue traders or runaways. She became even more isolated, her control over the plantation tightening into a suffocating grip. The remaining women in the cottage were quietly moved back to the main quarters, the experiment officially, silently, terminated. They carried the trauma of their experience in the quiet terror that never left their eyes. Thomas and Elara lived as strangers in the same house, their relationship a wasteland of unspoken accusations and mutual hatred. Julian retreated further into the bottle, a man hollowed out by his own weakness. Veridian Manor, once a monument to a dream, had become a mausoleum, haunted by the secrets buried within its walls. The wealth and legacy Elara had been so desperate to secure were built, but the foundation was rotten, and the entire edifice was slowly, inevitably, collapsing in on itself. Sarah and her son were given new names and a new life. With the help of the Quakers and the Abolition Society, they traveled to Canada, settling in a small community of freed slaves and abolitionists in Ontario. Sarah, now known as Elizabeth, learned to read and write. She became a powerful, though private, voice in the community, her testimony of what she had endured at Veridian Manor a stark reminder of what they had all escaped. She raised Samuel to be a proud, educated man, ensuring he understood the circumstances of his birth not as a source of shame, but as a testament to the resilience of his mother and the profound evil of the system they had fled. She never saw Thomas again, but she often thought of him, the sad, angry boy who had defied his mother in the only way he could, and in doing so, had saved them both. She knew that he remained in his own kind of prison, a gilded cage of wealth and misery, a fate that was in some ways as tragic as any other. She had escaped the plantation, but the memory of the red Georgia clay and the cold, calculating eyes of Elara Vance would remain with her forever. Years passed. The Civil War came and went, tearing the nation apart and rebuilding it on a new foundation. Slavery was abolished. Veridian Manor, like many plantations, fell into ruin, its fields fallow, its great house decaying. Elara Vance died in 1869, a bitter, impoverished woman, her two sons having predeceased her. Julian died of cirrhosis of the liver in 1862, and Thomas was killed at the Battle of Antietam, fighting for a confederacy he despised. The Vance name, once a symbol of pride and power in Oglethorpe County, faded into obscurity. The story of the breeding program was never officially exposed. The ledger was never made fully public. The abolitionists who held it feared that its explosive contents would be dismissed as propaganda, too monstrous to be believed, and that revealing it would compromise the safety of the still fragile underground railroad network. It remained a secret weapon, a story shared in hushed tones, a symbol of the deepest depravities the institution of slavery could produce. The official history of Veridian Manor became one of financial decline and wartime tragedy, a common story of the lost cause. The truth was buried, deemed too ugly for the history books. In 1958, a historian researching the archives of the Pennsylvania Abolition Society at the Historical Society of Pennsylvania stumbled upon a collection of uncatalogued documents. Among them was a leather-bound ledger, its dark green cover faded with age. The historian opened it, and the quiet, systematic horror of Elara Vance's program was revealed once more. The script was elegant, the notations precise, the contents stomach-turning. The document was authenticated, its ink and paper consistent with the 1840s. It was the smoking gun, the undeniable proof of a story that had existed only as a whisper. The historian published a paper on the find, referring to it as the Veridian Ledger. It caused a minor academic stir, but in a nation grappling with the civil rights movement, a story of horrors from a century past struggled to find purchase in the public consciousness. It was a footnote in the grand, brutal narrative of American slavery, a confirmation of a truth that many still preferred not to see, that the system was not just about forced labor, but about the absolute ownership of human flesh, a power that, in the wrong hands, could lead to experiments of unimaginable cruelty. The story of Elara Vance and her breeding program serves as a chilling reminder of the intersection between the pseudoscience of eugenics and the economics of slavery. While her program was an extreme and meticulously documented case, the underlying principle was not unique. Slave owners throughout the South practiced informal forms of selective breeding, pairing strong men with healthy women to produce more children, or increase. The practice of stock raising was a known, if rarely discussed, aspect of the plantation economy. What made Elara's experiment so particularly horrifying was its cold, scientific rationale and the direct involvement of her own children, a violation of the deepest taboos, even for a slave-holding society. She stripped the process of even the pretense of human interaction and reduced it to pure animal husbandry. The Veridian Ledger remains one of the most disturbing artifacts of the Antebellum South, a testament to the fact that the greatest horrors are often not the result of chaotic, passionate violence, but of calm, rational, and systematic evil. It proves that the most dangerous monster is not the one who shouts, but the one who sits quietly in her study, making neat, orderly entries in a book of unspeakable things. The story endures, a testament to the resilience of a woman named Sarah who dared to steal the evidence of her own dehumanization, ensuring that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, would one day find its way into the light. If you want more dark historical stories like this, subscribe to Macabre Mysteries of America and keep the past from being erased.